I'm Oron. I'm an artist. I'm also the director of Symbiotica at the University of Western Australia. I've been working with living biological materials as my art form since 1996. Working mainly with maintaining and growing fragments of complex bodies within kind of a cultural context.
I'm Gracie. I'm an artist, British artist, but based in Barcelona on and off since 2003. My practice has come from a kind of biologically oriented look at space culture, post-terrestrial futures, post-human futures, exoplanets, exobiology, which is recently transforming into works around the idea of existential risk, endings, crisis. Currently working on a collaboration with the ICO, Institute of Cosmic Sciences, University of Barcelona, about the end of the universe, and another project with Chris Holland about strategies of survival and risk based around theoretical asteroid impacts.
That's a really interesting question because we work at Symbiotica from within a biological science department. We tend to try and maintain some connection to reality in what we're doing. What is increasingly happening is that the narrative around life is becoming more and more fictional. As life becomes a raw material, as biology becomes an engineering, as there's a growing realization that you can actually extract value from life. There's growing narratives which are fictionalized about kind of the potential of life to become another neoliberal tool of extracting monetary value. So it's actually now a lot of my work is actually resisting those fictional narratives that are coming from people who are supposed to be way less fictional than artists. Artists have a license to make things look like something they're not. Other professions don't really have that. But we're seeing increasingly that there's narratives about life that are coming from industry and even from science and engineering, which are totally based on biological fantasies. And as artists, we now actually kind of trying to shine a mirror back at those fantasies and those fictional stories about what the potential of life is, as a way of kind of creating, basically showing how strange it is, because those fictional stories about life are all about normalizing this new relationship to life that we don't even have a cultural language to describe. And as artists, we want to basically make it strange again by highlighting the odd ways in which we engage with life.
Yeah, we were just talking actually, we were running here about that fiction is really what artists do, and that was a really nice phrase we invented about how we can kind of combine truths to create untruths, how we can begin to find seemingly disparate truths, and we weave threads through those to create new untruths. But then kind of creating these games, these challenges, these mirrors, then that kind of these exercises and how you navigate increasingly complex knowledge systems, society systems, economic systems, fictional systems, and how you begin to make sense of that, or how you can even be an extra grain of sand in there to kind of irritate and provoke and to play with this idea of where fiction and reality meet, if they do. And it seems becoming one of the most key issues in modern society, not kind of fiction in its classic sense, but the notion of what's fiction and what's fact is now such a predominant factor of modern life and how we navigate these situations which are arising. So the fiction axis, the fiction aspect is fundamental, I think, to so many other practices.
Yeah, maybe if I could add, actually, one of the things that I'm concentrating on for the next couple of years, I got an Australia Council fellowship in emerging experimental art to pursue a project which is based on me finding material evidence to a story that is obviously fiction, and it's the Frankenstein story. So I actually came here from the Orkney Islands in the very far north of Scotland, where part of the story of Frankenstein is happening. And it's really weird, but I did find convincing evidence for some of those parts of the stories that are happening in the Orkney Islands, knowing all too well that they're fiction. So, but how to construct a convincing narrative of something that I know is not true by having those material evidence is kind of what I'm going to spend my next 2 years doing. So recently I found myself, and obviously a lot of the work I do is in collaboration with Nazur, so I found myself presenting our work in increasingly optimistic shows which are framed as design shows rather than art shows. So all of the critical edge of our work disappears in favor, obviously not by our own will, but in favor of these optimistic design futures that are all about kind of creating narratives of everything is going to be okay, business as usual. We don't have to change our behavior because those new fantasies about kind of life and science would solve the problems that life and science created in the first place, or technology in particular. The transhumanist discourse is a really interesting one because I see it as a religious discourse. It's very, very similar to any other kind of doomsday religious cult that say that, if you follow their practice, you'll be saved, but everyone else will be destroyed. And it seems that they are kind of following a very similar narrative. It's also interesting to see that the shift from kind of the digital notion of uploading, for example, to the fact that the very same people are now promoting biological technologies is because that you can't escape biology, you can't escape the fact that you're a living biological thing, and those people realize that the idea of uploading and their consciousness, for example, is not really going to solve the problems anytime soon. So they're moving towards this notion of investing in those fantastical narratives of biology as a way of trying to find redemption for themselves. So again, our work kind of many times kind of pokes fun at that, or at least kind of try to deflate some of those fantasies, but often, this is something I talk about today as well, often our work is then being used for exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do as artists. But then going back to the idea of art can only challenge, art cannot be a direction. As artists, we can't be overly prescriptive in regard to how we think the audience should respond to our work. We only can put them in a situation where the perceptions are being challenged, where this friction actually takes place. And often, actually, by putting the audience or the people who receive our work in this challenging position, they would reach conclusions which are very, very different than our own. But that's okay.
I think one of the really key issues which is often overlooked when we talk about the general phenomena of techno solutions to the predicaments that we find ourselves in modern society, whether it's coming from the transhumanist cults or from kind of the Silicon Valley, which is another cult, through to all sorts of things, people talking about, it doesn't matter, something happens to Earth, we'll colonize the moon, colonize Mars, and this issue of privilege. You talk about these people that have so much rhetoric about we're saving humanity, we're saving humankind, we're saving civilization, we're doing all these things from the goodness of our hearts. I mean, it's not. It's about preserving a comfort that kind of we enjoy as white Western people. Me and Oron walkers, we're also looking male, middle-aged white males. I mean, we live that privilege. And it's really important to understand that so much of this promise is false, and it's not about the goodness of saving humankind. So the kind of techno-utopian promises, the solutions for solving mankind are still really tied into the kind of capitalist methodologies that we've been in for so long.
Yeah, but it's funny because those techno-utopian promises are actually sometimes, it seems like, going back to fiction, that some of the most dystopian stories are now being read as instruction manuals for this techno fetishistic kind of utopia. It's a really confusing time, because the very same scenarios that people were writing about 20, 100 years ago, as if this is kind of the worst thing that can happen to humanity, are now being hailed as solutions for, as some kind of a utopian technological solution to the problems we're in.
Which again, it's part of fiction. These are people selling fictions. The fictionalists are selling very convincing fictions, which is basically kind of pandering to a market that's really looking for it.
Yeah, but especially kind of around this idea of the startup culture that sells seductive narratives. Yeah, so again, it's like as artists, what can we do when the time that actually it's companies that are selling the most seductive, fantastical narratives that have very little connection to reality as a way of generating investments, and we as the public are actually collateral damage in the relationship between companies and investors. All of those seductive narratives are not really aimed at us at this stage. They're really aimed at kind of increased capital.
Yeah. Now there's a question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in a number of my works, I use kind of living organisms, kind of, and one fundamental difference between a lot of work, not exclusively, but a lot of work I've done with a lot of work at Oron done is Oron has used living matter as material, and I tend to use whole organisms more, so I guess there's a burden of care more, in the way that we interpret the significance of living matter assembled into a coherent organism, or as the stuff, the matter, the material of the organism. We impose a burden of care more on the coherent organism. And I guess it's a complicated conversation, really. And it's also very much dictated by the kind of organisms you're using. I mean, there's things, Adam Zaretsky, I first started talking about this thing called the fur barrier, where if it's kind of cute and furry, don't do anything bad to it. If it's an insect, a worm, a fish, even, then you pretty much, bacteria especially, do whatever you like to. But I think it's very subjective. The approach of the artist. And while unnecessary suffering is of course to be avoided, then I still think there is a certain liberty that can be taken with living organisms that can then open up the debate about consciousness, about responsibility, about value of life, about purpose of life, about the way that life is used, as the way that non-human life is used as a proxy for human life, to test out our ideas of ourselves upon it. And I think it's, there are some quite challenging methodologies that can maybe need to be employed to really get incisively into those matters. But it's a really kind of wide issue, and it's quite difficult to answer.
Yeah, but this is something I spent the last 20 odd years kind of thinking and dealing with. In 2002, we actually organized a conference called The Aesthetics of Care, which was basically, trying to frame this idea of working and manipulating living biological material in the context of care. And so first of all, this idea of, with the work of myself in particular, we're actually trying to take the human out of the equation, because our interest is more general around kind of questions around life and our inability to articulate it, and the poverty of our language to actually even describe what we're doing to this huge thing that we refer to as life, of its manifestations. But recently we had a series of works which we called Vessels of Care and Control, and the whole idea there is also to highlight the fact that when you engage with living biological materials, when you try to impose your will over living biological material, you deal with two things that are supposedly oppositional, but they're actually very, very linked, and that's care and violence. You always exercise violence by imposing your will on a system that existed outside of your own control initially, and even by caring for it, it is a form of violence, and we need to acknowledge that. And so it's a way also to try and question those romantic notions about biological solutions, which are always and will always continue to involve a violent act of either separating the life form that you're working with from the rest of the world, the rest of the living world, trying to, when you think about gardening, it's always kind of being seen as a great way of kind of relaxing and a great way of caring for the world around you, but gardening is an extremely violent activity. You weed, you prune, you try to control kind of the environment where you're in, and we need to acknowledge that. So we can't really move forward dealing with biological systems without all of this acknowledgement of the different levels of violence and care that are involved in that process.